Hey guys, and welcome back. So now what I want to briefly talk to you about is the concept of being able to predict future resource needs. Now to begin, one of the first tools I want to talk to you about is something called collectd. Now what this is ultimately a daemon, okay? And this daemon has the purpose of collecting system statistics. Now the way collectd actually does this is that it uses something called plugins. And these plugins actually determine what collectd will actually collect. Now one thing to note about the collectd daemon is that there are some limitations here. This is not an all-purpose tool. For example, the purpose is really limited to collecting, and it would help if I could spell that correctly, collecting data. That means that it's not going to display the data for you in a nice graphical form or anything like that, or analyze the data. Instead, collectd is just going to, like I say, collect that data, and you can then feed that data, if you so wish, into another program. Now, collectd typically is not installed by default on most Linux systems, so we do actually have to run through the installation. So what I will say here, on my Xubuntu machine, I can just use the apt package manager and install collectd. Just type in my password and hit Y and enter. Okay, perfect. So now that we have collectd installed, let me just clear the screen. One of the things that we want to be aware of for the purposes of the examination is where we can actually configure the collectd daemon. Now we are going to be able to do this by modifying a file in a particular location. So let me show you what this location is. If I go into the etc directory and then go into collectd, if I do an ls, we should now see this collectd.conf file, okay? So try to remember that path, etc collectd.conf. If I go in and modify this, let's say nano for example, and hit enter, this is the main configuration file. Now within here, we can do many cool things. We can actually determine how often we should be able to collect particular data. So say for example here, we can see we have this value here, interval 10. This means that every 10 seconds, we will have a new query collecting more data. Now this is the default value. If we want to happen to change this, we would uncomment this configuration by removing the what is now called the hashtag, and we can see the color changed, and we could change this interval to maybe say every 5 seconds or every 15 seconds, however you choose. But for now, I'm actually not too bothered with this, so I'll just comment this out. So it's inactive, and we'll still have the default of 10. Now if we scroll on down, another really important thing to notice is this plugin section right here. This is going to allow us to specify which features we actually want to collect information on. Now if you happen to scroll down, you'll notice that most of these plugins are commented out. The ones which are actually on by default are the battery, the CPU, the disk, entropy, interfaces, memory, so on and so forth. But the vast majority, like I say, are commented out. But if we wanted to decide that, hey, we actually want to collect information on our network, we could go to the plugin network and we could just remove the hashtag to uncomment out this configuration, and this would allow us to activate this configuration. Say for example, I could just save this. Oh, and notice, I should have pointed this out, this is a global configuration file within the etc directory, therefore I'm going to have to use super user privileges. So I would say sudo nano collectd.conf and scroll on down. Now I could remove and save the changes. And in order for these changes to take effect, we would actually have to reload the service. So I could say sudo systemctl restart collectd.service. So if I hit enter, that should now reload the service, and the new configurations, i.e. the changes we have just made, will take effect, and we can actually use collectd to monitor our network statistics. So really for the purposes of the examination, understand what collectd does and what it does not do, and really try to remember the location of the configuration file and understand that we have these concepts of plugins, and if we want to activate a particular plugin so that we can measure a particular resource such as a CPU or what is going on in our network, we can just simply uncomment that plugin so that it will be active after we reload the configuration file. Now, another thing I want to just briefly touch upon is the subject of monitoring solutions. There are some solutions we have to have an awareness of, at least at a high level, for the purposes of the examination. But like I say, this is just a high level topic, meaning that you don't have to really concern yourself with how to configure these tools specifically, just more have an awareness of what they actually do. So the first monitoring solution I want to point out is one called Nagios or Nagios. I've heard it said both ways, I'm not quite sure the correct way. Now Nagios is ultimately a family of projects, so we could have a Nagios log server or a Nagios network analyzer or a Nagios incident manager, so on and so forth. Now the cool thing about Nagios is that it can provide a plugin to interact with CollectD. We can actually use CollectD-Nagios, and that can actually be used to query the CollectD daemon for information. So the information that is collected by CollectD, we can feed it into Nagios and use the Nagios network analyzer to analyze the network traffic, or network statistics, should I say, that we have gathered using CollectD. Now, another solution we have is one called MRTG. This is the multi-router traffic grapher, and this is really used to monitor network traffic load. It basically reads information from your router and your logs, and you can actually take this information and graph it. So this can provide a nice visual interpretation of that information to make it much more digestible for you as a system administrator. Now, another one we want to be aware of is one called Cacti. This too, like MRTG, also focuses on network monitoring. Now, this tool is basically a front-end interface for something called RRD tool. Now, this stands for the Round Robin Database tool. So simply put, information collected by the Round Robin Database tool can be ingested by Cacti, and Cacti will provide to you a nice, easy interface so that you can display information or graph particular data received via this tool. Now, the key thing to note about all of these types of tools is that we can take this information, monitor our data, and we can use that information to observe and use for capacity planning. Say, for example, you happen to note on your graph you're having a very large and prolonged spike in maybe say network traffic. You might think, hey, we're actually getting much more network use. Maybe it's now time to increase our bandwidth, because if we keep following this trajectory of network use just getting higher and higher and higher, suddenly we're going to get a bottleneck and the users are going to suffer. And we definitely do not want that. So having this type of monitoring information allows us to plan ahead, and we can see trends on the horizon as they are approaching. So really, these tools altogether is going to help you identify resource exhaustion and allow you to predict growth and even diagnose particular problems. If you happen to see a spike in some particular resource, CPU, maybe it is network traffic, you can then use that information to potentially identify a particular problem on your network. So the ability to collect data, to be able to feed that data into a tool which can graph that data or analyze that data, this is obviously very valuable for anyone administering and managing the systems on our network. Now, one thing to say about these tools, just as a disclaimer, is that there is no way you can get 100% accuracy with these tools. You might be able to graph a particular trend, but there is no way for you to know that that trend is going to continue. Say, for example, you've got a nice graph which is showing a very steady rate of growth over a particular period of time. There is no way for you to know that suddenly you're going to encounter an abnormal spike, okay? So just be aware that these tools definitely have a use. They definitely provide valuable information, but there are limitations to their abilities. Okay, dokes, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.